Good morning, and can I welcome everyone to the 10th meeting of the Public Petitions Committee in 2020. This meeting is being held virtually. The first item on our agenda today is the consideration of new petitions. The first new petition for consideration today is Petition 1792 on access to Scottish piers and harbours, lodged by Thomas Butler. The petition calls on the Scottish Government to ensure that local authorities and service providers provide access for those with disabilities at public facilities such as piers and harbours. We've received a written submission from the Scottish Government. The submission states that as ports are a commercial interest, it's not for the Scottish Government to decide how it should operate, which includes accessibility issues. The submission also states that a port could be said to provide a public function under the Equality Act 2010. Compliance with the Act rests with individual organisations, in this case Highland Council, which owns Uig Port. Responsibility for oversight of compliance with the 2010 Act rests with the Equality and Human Rights Commission. I did think that there was an issue here. I'm not quite sure if it's good enough for the Scottish Government to say that it's a commercial proposition, because all businesses presumably have to comply with the law, and I think there are particularly important issues around accessibility and the rights of people with disabilities. So I think there is something that we would want to look at further in this regard. But I'm going to ask members for any comments, and I shall call Maurice Corry first.
Thank you, Convener, for that. Yes, I mean, it's very, very important that we get this access issue and piers and harbours correct. I mean, after all, when we travel our railways, Network Rail have to allow for disabled passengers to travel, and they certainly put that into operation in all the stations throughout the UK, and both onto the trains and indeed around the stations, such as through lifts and ramps. There's quite clear guidance in the building regulations and indeed in the Equality Act to ensure that there is sufficient access allowed for disability and those who have disabled issues. And also, we have to also consider that there are issues around the private and public ownership of our piers and how these things are going to be implemented. So it's not just the state, as it were, or the local authority dealing with these. It's also incumbent on the actual owners of these harbours and piers around Scotland. So I would action at the moment that we write to the Highland Council for their views on the ports that's raised by the petitioner in Uig to see what their reaction is to this. But clearly there's some fundamental issues we need to look at. Thank you.
Thank you, Maurice. Can I call David Torrance?
Good morning, Convener, and thank you. I would agree with Maurice there about writing to Highland Council, but can we also write to the Equality and Human Rights Commissioner to see what their stance is on it? And that's all I've got to add, Convener.
Okay, thank you. Tom Mason?
Yes, it's certainly very important we get this right. It's to do with enforcement more than the actual regulations. I mean, it's very clear who is responsible and what has to be done. But we need to get some views from Highland Council, the Human Rights Commission, and to make sure we get all the information together. So that if enforcement is the requirement, then that will be the outcome of this petition. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Gail Ross?
Thank you, Convener. Yes, I agree with everything that's been said so far. I think it's worth stating as well that the petitioner is, I think what he's trying to get over is the access to the water rather than the access to the ferry. The new pier is being built to accommodate the new ferry. And there was a quote in one of our papers that said, you know, there will still continue to be gangway access, and people that can't access that can access through the car doors. But I think that that's separate from what the petitioner is actually asking for. It's a ramp to the water rather than steps to the water. So I think he's absolutely right in asking the question, if there's going to be a £60 million investment in a new pier, then why on earth are we not letting disabled people access the actual water for things like water tourism, which, as he states as well correctly, is big business now. And coming from the coast myself, I know that access to water and boats and different things like that, water tourism, can be extremely important to people. So I do think that writing to the Highland Council and writing to the Equalities and Human Rights Commission, I would also like to see whether or not there's been an equality impact assessment done, because I really do think that we're kind of cutting off our nose to spite our face here and not putting in a ramp with access to the water when we're spending so much money, and I would really like to see answers as to why that's not happening. Thank you.
Thanks, Gail. I think there's genuine consensus that we would be writing to the Equality Human Rights Commission and to Highland Council. Can I just ask, Gail, when you talked about whether an equality impact assessment was done, who would you be envisaging doing that? Because I was quite struck with the fact in the Scottish Government response that they said they didn't think it was the job of the Scottish Government to opine, which I think possibly it might be in terms of equality issues, but I wonder whether, who would you have envisaged doing the equality impact assessment? Gail?
Thank you, Convener. I think that when we're coming to infrastructure projects of this scale, because it's the ownership of the Highland Council, and it would be a Highland Council planning issue, then I would imagine that the Highland Council would have to do, I mean, knowing that being a councillor myself, we've always had at the end of all the papers, you know, and it's unfortunate that it nearly always says this has no adverse impacts on equalities. I think we need to start looking at what positive impacts that these things can have on equalities as well. And I don't think it's good enough saying, well, it has no adverse impacts. So I think it might be for the Scottish Government and the Highland Council to fight that one out as to who's responsible for it. But I would say that it probably is the Council's responsibility.
Okay. Thanks very much for that, Gail. I think there is a general consensus then that we'd write to the Highland Council, including the question highlighted by Gail, and write to the Equality and Human Rights Commission to ask their view on this. And I think the important issue is that not just access to the pier, but actually access to the water as well, has been flagged up by Gail. Do any members that disagree with this approach? In that case, can I suggest that we confirm that as our action, and we will obviously consider these responses when they are received. Can we now move to the second new petition for the consideration today, which is petition 1794 on new eligibility criteria for the Small Business Bonus Scheme, lodged by Christopher Walls. Petition calls the Scottish Government to expand the eligibility criteria for the Small Business Bonus Scheme to ensure that small businesses can benefit from it no matter what their location. We've received submissions from the Scottish Government and the petitioner. These are included in the Clerk's note. The Scottish Government submission explains that it has commissioned the Fraser of Allender Institute to carry out an independent review of the scheme. The Institute is set to report in spring 2021, and the Government advises that it would be inappropriate to introduce significant reforms in advance of that report. I think it's quite an interesting issue here. I'm not sure if this particular petition really addresses a lot of these questions, but one of the things I've been struck by during the pandemic is businesses that have contacted me to say that for whatever reason they aren't eligible for kind of loans or grants or whatever, because, you know, although they're a small business, they're seen to be in the context perhaps of operating out of an area where the rates are high and so on. I think there's a bigger issue that has been flagged up in this specific one, although I'm struck by the fact that Scottish Government is agreeing to review the Small Business Bonus Scheme, and it may be that we'd want to flag up to the Scottish Government that this is something we think that they should be looking at. But I wonder if members have any comments, and can I ask Maurice Corry first?
Thank you, Convener. I would agree with you, and I think you hit on a very important point about what has come out of and during the COVID emergency, because I too have had questions raised with me by small businesses in my area and region. And I think it is good news to hear that there is the Fraser of Allender report being prepared. And I think we need to wait the outcome of that. But I think also we need to feed in the new factors which you and I have just discussed over the COVID emergency. And there's some new things which I think the local authorities need to be aware of. I'm also very keen that localism is very important, that it's the local authorities know best in their own areas and obviously should be applying any nuances towards what needs to be done. But I think we've got two things here that we need to wait for and ask for is that the results of the Fraser-Valley report, inputting, and some way the committee can suggest to that and to the Scottish Government that they take cognizance of the points that have been raised so far by yourself and myself and other members as we go on. But I think we must be very careful that we don't get into a position where the Scottish Government is looking at a result of that report and then starts talking about a one-size-fits-all for all areas throughout Scotland. I think that is wrong, and I think we need to take a lot of cognizance of localism and the local situations for local authorities to take the final decisions. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. David Torrance.
Towards the petitioner, but like Maurice, I think we have to wait on results from the Fraser-Valley report, and until that comes, I don't think we could really do anything. And I would like to actually close the petition under Rule 15.7 because the Scottish Government aren't going to change the criteria just now, but also let the petitioner know that if he is not happy with the report and any changes which come out in the spring, that he's allowed to come back to the committee and resubmit his petition. Thank
you, David. Tom?
Remember that it's called a small business bonus scheme, but in fact it's a taxation scheme, and it's a reduction in taxation, not a bonus. And as such, it affects the various companies in different extent in different parts of the country. And in fact, in areas of high rentable values. And this does jeopardise what could be marginal businesses in important areas. But if there's a review taking place, then any action that is taken will be unnecessary at this stage, and the review must be we must wait on the review before taking any action. Thank you.
Thank you. Gail Ross.
Thank you, Convener. Yes, I think that the overall view is that there's a review already underway. Any action that we ask for could be subsumed when that comes out. I was interested to hear Maurice Corry said that he would want to say that one size doesn't fit all. We've been pushing for different approaches in Highland for a lot of things for a lot of years, so I would agree with that as well. But I think we need to wait and see what the Fraser of Allender review comes out with the terms of reference. And I wonder if the petitioner could us feed into that. I think you mentioned at the start about putting forward some views or flag it up to the review, and I think that would be very useful as well. But I do agree with David. I think that we should move to close and the petitioner thank the petitioner and invite their views in a year's time if they don't feel that it's been addressed.
Okay. Thank you, Gail. I think there's a consensus that there is an issue around the functioning of the small business bonus scheme. The particular issue that's flagged up the petitioner having a very small business, but in the context of a large shopping centre, which I'm not sure if the small business bonus scheme in itself will address it. So I think my sense of the committee is there's an issue here, but the question is whether holding the petition open until the review is complete actually adds anything. I think it would be more important probably to make sure that the petitioner is aware that it can maybe feed into the review, and that this is something we would hope that in its consideration of what the review says, the Scottish Government is aware that there are some people who end up being excluded from the scheme when perhaps it was a group that the scheme originally was intended to address. So my sense is that people would recognise an issue here, but that we'd want to close the petition on the basis that the review is undergoing and it's happening just now. The Scottish Government will respond to that in due course. And at that point, we would hope that the Scottish Government would be aware of a lot of the issues that have been highlighted by the pandemic, and that in thanking the petitioner for bringing this forward and highlighting these issues, we would emphasise to them that they would be able to resubmit the petition in September 21 if that was something that they would really want to have a focus again and the Public Petitions Committee at that stage could make a decision on how they would take that forward. So that would be my proposal, that we would be closing the petition but recognising there would be routes for the petitioner to take this forward subsequent to the review by Fraser of Allender. Does anybody disagree with that course of action? No. In that case, that is agreed, and we want to thank the petitioner but recognise the issues that have been highlighted and assure the petitioner that there's an opportunity in the future for them to bring this back to the Petitions Committee if that were seen to be useful, but of course in the meantime to engage with the Scottish Government in highlighting these issues too. The next new petition for consideration today is Petition 1795 on funding for Sports Gaelic, lodged by Martin McAvila on behalf of Mishnach. The petition calls on the Scottish Government to meet with Bord na Gaelic to discuss longer term and sustainable funding for Sports Gaelic, social enterprise delivering outdoor learning to young people through the medium of Gaelic. We've received a written submission from the Scottish Government. It highlights that Sports Gaelic did not realise sufficient interest from local authorities that it had hoped, leading to the financial problems discussed in the petition. Bord na Gaelic has agreed to an additional funding package for the period up to March 2021, once the board has received income projections from Sports Gaelic demonstrating viability. The board plan on supporting the sports team in discussions with Sports Scotland to seek other funders for longer term sustainability. In terms of this, I would recognise that any group that was trying to do this kind of work in these circumstances, relying on local government, is going to be very difficult because funding is so stretched. And I think personally I feel that the Scottish Government is a bit hands-off, and perhaps Bord na Gaelic a bit hands-off to say, well, you have to find a way of making yourselves viable. I think they have to make a decision about whether this kind of way of supporting Gaelic through sport is something that they value, and if so, maybe that's something that they could look to support, although we do recognise that short-term funding has been provided. But the longer-term question is, how do you get longer-term sustainability? Is that down to Sports Gaelic, or does it fit into the context of the kind of approach to Gaelic by local government and by the Scottish Government? Perhaps declare an interest as someone whose family are Gaelic speakers, even though it's been lost in me, but and indeed have family who are young enough to engage in Gaelic sports or sports through the medium of Gaelic. But I'm interested in the views of other committee members, and I'm going to ask Maurice Corry first.
Thank you, Convener. Yeah, I think this is such a specialised subject that I think we need to get some more information from the Gaelic board to see exactly where they want to go with this. I'm certainly very keen that it's obviously involving young people, it's involving sport, the traditions of the Gaelic community, and I would hate to see that lost. And I think by asking for more information from the Gaelic board, we'll be in a better position to see how we take this petition forward. But I certainly would ask that the action be to write to the Gaelic board, and indeed, if we feel fit, that there may be issues and things that we should ask for from the local authorities within the Gaelic speaking area. And I think that wouldn't be a bad thing to do.
Thank you, Maurice. David Torrance.
Thank you, Convener. I agree with Maurice on everything. Like any group, funding is difficult at this time, but I think we should seek the Scottish Government's views on this as well and write to them and ask if they're going to meet with the Board Gaelic.
Thank you, David. Tom?
The connection between outdoor sports and Gaelic, I have difficulty understanding, not having intricate detail of it. It is essentially a funding request, and if they're not interesting the local authorities, then they will have some difficulty, because essentially the local authority is the body that would determine localization. But we do need more information, and certainly I think the government should be asked whether it fits in with their overall policy with Gaelic. So I'm certainly writing to Sports Gaelic and the board, whatever, Gaelic board, and the government, I think, is essential before we move forward.
Thank you, Tom. Gail Ross.
Thank you, Convener. Yeah, I think it is a shame that the uptake has been low from local authorities, although they are open to other groups and indeed individuals coming forward. I think we do need to write to Bord na Gaelic. I think that from our papers, it would seem that there are ongoing meetings. I mean, the Scottish Government meet with the board on a regular basis, and Sport Scotland are involved as well. And the petition calls on Scottish Government to meet with the board, which they are doing. But I think, to keep this open at the moment and get comments from Bord na Gaelic just to see what the lie of the land is, and possibly also writing to the local authorities that do have an interest as well, I think might be beneficial, just to what level of engagement they've had. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Gail. I think we're agreeing there is an issue here. We're recognising the context of, whether local authorities have funding to make available. So I think we are first want to write to Bord na Gaelic, Sports Gaelic, and to the Scottish Government to ask if they have a role in this in the context of their commitment to the language. In terms of which local authorities we would write to, I wonder whether we should write to COSLA, because they would have a best idea maybe of what particular areas, because there are clearly Gaelic speaking areas, but then there are the Gaelic schools, Gaelic medium education in places like Glasgow, and I suppose the issue would be the extent to which there is an understanding of what's being offered here in terms of its value. But I think my sense is we're agreeing there's an issue that we would write, as I've highlighted, Bord na Gaelic, Sports Gaelic, perhaps COSLA, and I wonder if people, does any member disagree with this approach? No, in that case, that's agreed, and we will look forward to a response to our letters. The next new petition for consideration today is Petition 1796 on equality and inclusion in minority languages, also lodged by Martin McAveely on behalf of Michener. The petition calls on the Scottish Government to review whether public bodies are complying with the Gaelic Language Scotland Act 2005 to ensure that the Gaelic language and therefore linguistic diversity is fully recognised and promoted in Scotland. We've received a written submission from the Scottish Government. The submission states that Bord na Gaelic monitors delivery and effectiveness of Gaelic language plans, which it supports public authorities to deliver under the 2005 Act. The Act includes a requirement on authorities to submit an annual monitoring report, which is now underway. The board also commissioned independent research on some of the Gaelic language plans, which did not indicate there were any issues. The submission also reflects on the challenge of resources for both the board and the authorities. The Scottish Government has responded by bringing relevant organisations together under the initiative Faster Rate of Progress for Gaelic, with the aim of ensuring Gaelic is more efficiently embedded into policy developments. I think in relation to this issue, I think this is about monitoring and understanding trends and to get a sense of whether that is being effective or not. Can I maybe ask Maurice for his comments?
Yeah, this is an interesting one and sort of follows on from the previous petition. I think the main issue here is that the Scottish Government, to be fair, has recognised the challenge and obviously has raised back to the 2005 Act. I cannot see any further work that can be done by keeping the petition open because obviously the Scottish Government have confirmed that they are monitoring the situation with the Gaelic boards and the respective bodies concerned to ensure linguistic diversity and everything and Gaelic is fully recognised and promoted in Scotland, which we all know is. So I think we need to let the course of the Scottish Government's actions take effect and certainly suggest that if the petitioner is not satisfied with the closing of the petition, then he comes back in the due respect of time to see how progress has been made by the Scottish Government.
Thank you, Maurice. David Torrance.
Thank you, Convener. I probably agree with everything that Maurice has said here. I think we should probably close the petition because the Scottish Government has listened to the concerns raised and, as Maurice says, they're monitoring it to see how the progress has been made So I think the Scottish Government is doing everything it can at this time.
Yep, thank you. Tom Mason?
Yes, I think once again it's effectively making sure that funds are directed in this direction, and it seems to be enough monitoring and assessment going on not to interfere with that process at the moment. So I think closing would be advantageous for this particular case. Thank you.
Thank you, Tom. Gail Ross?
Thank you, Convener. Yes, I agree. I don't think there's anything further to add. I think the monitoring is in place, and is to thank the petitioner, and I think we should close this one. But again, he's free to come back if he feels that the monitoring that's in place is insufficient. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I wondered, my only question was what had prompted the petition in terms, there seems to be something about that emphasising the right to invest in Gaelic. I don't know whether there were some concerns perhaps by the petitioner that there was a suggestion this was excluding other people. I think we would want to confirm that we did support for Gaelic, and that the Scottish Government is doing that. So I think my sense is that the petition, people recognise the importance of Gaelic, recognise the importance of a petition that highlights that, and it needs to be monitoring. That monitoring needs to be effective, and that we would be agreeing to close the petition under Standing Order Rule 15.7, given the Scottish Government has stated that public bodies are complying with the Scottish Language Act as the petition asks. And again, I think we would emphasise if there are issues that would suggest that's not happening, this is an opportunity. Petitioner could bring the petition back in a year's time in order to make sure that these matters were considered further. Does any member disagree with that approach? No. In that case, we agree to close the petition, but we do thank again the petitioner for highlighting these issues and recognise the importance of ongoing monitoring of work and support in Gaelic. The final new petition for consideration today is petition 1797 on end live chick culling in the egg industry, lodged by Kirsten McQuarrie. The petition calls on the Scottish Government to ban the maceration of newborn male chicks and set a deadline to end all live chick culling in the egg industry. Our papers for this meeting state that there are currently no hatcheries located in Scotland producing laying hens for egg production. Therefore, there is no maceration of newborn male chicks. Since our meeting papers were circulated, we have received a written submission in support of this petition from Dr. Lizzie Rowe, who is a Research Associate in Farm Animal Welfare at Bristol Veterinary School. This submission has been sent to us separately for our information. I thought there were interesting issues here, and they do say every day is a school day, so I learned more than probably I could have expected to know about what's happening in the egg industry. And I suppose I was very sympathetic to the petitioner in regards of finding a way of, feeding people without animal cruelty and in this way. But I was also very struck by the benefits of having a response from the Scottish Government early, which flags up that there aren't actually any hatcheries in Scotland at the moment. I'm going to ask members for their comments and call Maurice Corry first.
I think it's interesting that other countries in the world have moved in the direction of banning maceration of male chicks, and obviously the paper from the Scottish Government was very helpful. I think as there are currently no hatcheries located in Scotland producing the laying hens for egg production, and there's therefore no maceration of newborn male chicks, I would move that we close this petition and really look at it from that point of view. And I don't think there's any point in carrying this petition on just now, based on the information we've got recently from the Scottish Government.
Thank you. David Torrance?
I think we should close the petition as well, on the information from the Scottish Government convener, and I don't have anything else to say on it.
Okay, thank you. Tom Mason?
No, I agree with that. If it's not an actual problem here in Scotland, then I think no point in keeping this one open. But certainly, if the government can continue monitoring the developments in in other areas of determining sex of eggs, if that's the way to describe it, then so that's good, and hopefully that will be achieved in due course. So closing at this stage, I think, is appropriate. Thank you.
Thank you. Gail Ross.
Thank you, Convener. Yes, I think that the Scottish Government are aware of this situation, and I was pleased to see in the submission that they will work towards a more humane solution. I think that the fact that there are no macerations taking place in Scotland is important, but I think the point of the petitioner is that it's still in guidance and therefore is still permissible, even if it's not actually being used. So I'm happy that the Scottish Government are working towards it. I hate to think of it happening, but there are various humane organisations that do say that it's instantaneous, and it is a humane way of dispatching of male chicks. I'm not sure I entirely agree, but I'm not going to argue against the professionals. I do think that it's something that's being monitored by various organisations, and I know that the cross-party group on animal welfare were also looking into this as well. So it's not just a single issue. For the petitioner, I have much sympathy for it, but I have to look at where we are in the Petitions Committee, and I don't think that there is going to be any benefit in us keeping this open. I do completely understand where the petitioner is coming from and where she seeks to go, but I think that we do need to close the petition. I mean, certainly I know that it's something that a lot of people are going to keep monitoring where we are with in ovo sexing of eggs, and it is something that the industry itself is aware of. So I would agree in closing the petition, but again, thanking the petitioner.
Thank you, Gail. I think there is a, based on the discussion we've had, I think we are recognising there's an issue here. We are reassured by the fact that there are not hatcheries in Scotland, but also recognise that there's still something that could happen. I think the points that Gail makes about the role of the Scottish Government in this, understanding there's an issue, that other bits of the parliamentary system are very aware of it through cross-party group and so on. I think I hope we'll give the petitioner reassurance that this is something that is recognised as an important issue, and that there are ways to deal with it, that there are options available in terms of, it's not that, well, we've got this process, we'll just continue. We recognise that there's a recognition that this is something people want to move away from in terms of animal welfare, but that we are agreeing nevertheless to close the petition on the basis that there are currently no hatcheries located in Scotland, and therefore there's no maceration of newborn male chicks. And that the Scottish Government, we hope, will continue to monitor developments in this area of research. Does anybody disagree with that? No. Okay, in that case, that course of action is agreed. And again, we'd want to thank the petitioner for highlighting these issues. And of course, the Public Petition Committee looking at these has already flagged up to people and perhaps create a bit of general awareness about something that some of us didn't know about before. With that, can I suggest that we suspend the meeting briefly and return at 10:10? Okay, can I call the meeting back to order? And we'll now move to the next item on our agenda, which is consideration of continued petitions. The first continued petition for consideration today is petition 1596 on In-Care Survivor Service Scotland, lodged by Paul Anderson, James McDermott and Chris Daly. This petition was last considered at our meeting on 19 December 2019, when we took evidence from the Deputy First Minister. The Deputy First Minister has since provided a written submission with more information regarding data sharing and referrals. Submissions have also been received from Helen Holland, who is chair of the survivor group In-Care Abuse Survivors, and the petitioner. In her submission, Helen Holland argues that the concerns behind the petition have been proven to be unfounded, stating that survivors can access support that they need, either through future pathways or by continuing with their current provision. In his submission, the petitioner explains that Future Pathways have made amendments to their support agreement in response to concerns he has raised. The petitioner also highlights the importance to him of the Deputy First Minister's commitment, confirmation, that survivors can register with Future Pathways using a pseudonym and do not have to provide a home address. I think members will be aware that I have a particular interest in this issue, and I think that there were important issues flagged up in the initial petition. I am concerned if anyone saw our interest in this as either aggressive or excluding of survivors, and I very much take on board the response from Helen Holland and others that they believe that these matters have been resolved. It certainly wasn't ever my intention. I think the intention of the committee to exclude anybody. We're always very alive to the issue that there are funding issues which may get played out on these discussions, and obviously that was already flagged up. I do think that it's essential that Future Pathways or whichever organisation work with survivors work to meet their needs as survivors themselves express them. And I, for one, have certainly been reassured that there has been some progress in that regard. And I wonder if members have any comments. I'm going to call Maurice Corry first.
Previous submission of a petition. I think what's interesting in the petition's response is that they highlight that amendments to the Future Pathways have been made, and recognising and following on from concerns that he's actually raised to the support agreement. And I think that's important. So we can see there is some flow through from the highlighting of issues by petitioners to actually some action happening. I think it's quite clear from the information we've received is that the Scottish Government's position is clear that is the recommendation of the Future Pathways, and I think that's what we need to follow through. And I would advocate that under the Standing Orders Rule 15.7, that there is a level of support that survivors can access through the Future Pathways. Issues have been addressed, but of course, I actually have the opinion that we're always learning, and therefore it's important that if anybody's got any issues, then they bring them forward in the due time of the petition process. But I would advocate we close at this point, as we believe that the Scottish Government has made some good progress on it, and help certainly address the issues into the main points of the petitioner's comments and amendments he's requested. Thank you.
Thank you, Maurice. Can I call David Torrance?
Thank you, Convener. Like Maurice, I would like to close the petition because I think the Scottish Government has made progress and actions are there, and reassurance is there that people can still get that support. But what's key for me is not only that they could get the support through Future Pathways, as key as that is they could continue with their current provision. And I think that, for me, reassures me that they're still going to get the support there and the support that they need. So I'm quite happy to close the petition, Convener.
Thank you. Tom Mason?
I mean, it's obvious from this, to me, that I came in quite late on this one, and that there was a difference, and that the differences have been resolved by basically talking, which is, and therefore, in my mind, the petition process has achieved what it's one of the objectives it set out to do. So, having got some understanding across the board, I think closing it at this stage, I think is the right thing to do.
Thank you. Gail Ross?
Yes, thank you, Convener. I agree. I think that the substantive points in the initial petition have been addressed. I also would not want to have the perception in any community that the committee was in any way missing out or doing anything against another part of a group that seemed to be detrimental or negative. But I think that the petitioner has achieved quite a lot with this petition in a positive sense, and we've had a lot of answers from everyone that has come before us, including the Deputy First Minister. And I agree with David Torrance that one of the most important things is the continuation of current provision, which we have had a reassurance of. So with all those things taken into account, I would agree that it is time now to close this petition and to thank the petitioner.
Thank you. I certainly think that everybody in the Public Petitions Committee, through the consideration of this petition, have been very aware that there has been discussions around how support is delivered, what is the nature of support, how important it is for survivors to be at the centre of that. And some of the issue around this particular petition was around the decision to move to what's called a brokerage system, where you basically, signpost people to different kinds of support, and that perhaps group support and individual counselling would be lost. But there are reassurances that that's not happened. And I think, as Gail has said, there has been progress made. We will know that survivors continue to battle on, defining need for themselves, and it's essential that government is alive to that and listens to that, and indeed that everyone who has a role in supporting people are alive to that. This petition, I think, has done that. I have no doubt whatsoever that the campaigners will continue highlighting these important issues, and I think we are agreeing that we would close the petition, given that there has been progress. But I think it would be fair to say we recognise that there are still many struggles and battles to go on for survivors themselves, and that we would certainly want to ensure that survivors, wherever they are, feel that the Public Petitions Committee has been, is a means by some of these issues being highlighted. But I would suggest that we're agreeing that we would want to close the petition, understanding Order Rule 15.7, on the basis that survivors can access the level of support that they require through future pathways and can continue to have their current provision. And of course, if evidence of that changing, there is always the opportunity for petitioners to come back and to raise these issues in the normal way through elected members and so on. And that we would want to thank the petitioner for, I know what is a personal cost pursuing these issues, and we're very challenging for them. And I think we're agreed on that course of action. In that case, if we can then move on, the next continued petition for consideration today, which is petition 1690 on review treatment of people with ME in Scotland, lodged by Emma Shorter on behalf of ME Action in Scotland. The petition calls on the Scottish Government to review the level of support for people with ME in Scotland with a view to investing in biomedical research and creating a centre of excellence for ME, ensuring healthcare professionals' training and education materials reflect the latest scientific evidence, providing specialist care for patients, and continuing the harmful treatments graded exercise therapy, GET, and cognitive behavioural therapy, CBT. This petition was last considered by the committee at its meeting on 19 December 2019, when it took evidence from the Cabinet Secretary for Health and Sport and officials, including the then Chief Medical Officer. Since that meeting, the committee has received submissions from the Cabinet Secretary for Health and Sport and the former Chief Medical Officer to provide further information requested by the committee during the evidence session. The committee has also received 3 submissions from the petitioner. These are summarised in our clerk's note. The committee recognises that submissions from the Cabinet Secretary and the then Chief Medical Officer and the timescales outlined within were provided before the COVID-19 public health emergency. The committee acknowledges that these timescales will have been affected by the focus on COVID-19 demanded by this crisis. And I think I should note too that we had a further late submission for the Cabinet Secretary for Health and Sport, which was made available to the committee yesterday, but does in fact, I think, include very helpful information around progress by the Scottish Government. I think I had some concerns that the research was very minimalist, but I think the letter from the Cabinet Secretary gives us some reassurance in that regard. I am conscious that everything is influenced by COVID-19, but the experience of people with ME is still important that there is a focus on that. And indeed, I've heard some discussions around understanding the long-term impact of COVID-19 may be like the experience of people with ME, and I would hope that the Scottish Government, in taking this forward, would recognise that there is learning to be done and understanding to be had by looking at the experience of people with ME. I'm going to ask members for any comments or suggestions for action, and I'll go first to Maurice Corry.
I think this is a very interesting one, and obviously, sadly, it is a fairly large issue in Scotland. Now, I think the good thing is the question that the Scottish Government's creation of the Centre of Excellence and tried to really get into this, dive into this issue, and the level of research into ME in Scotland has definitely increased. And I think the interesting fact in the papers that we've received also is now the awareness being made in the medical schools, and therefore the foundation teaching to our medical students and future doctors and clinicians. And that is heartening to see that that's actually happening, and obviously strengthened by the very recent letter from the Cabinet Secretary for Health and Sport, in the fact that she's confirmed that as well. Also, we're looking for the publication of the NICE guidelines in December 2020, which obviously we will wait with interest. But nevertheless, I think the actions are all going in the right direction, that we could at this stage actually, under the Standing Order Rules 15.7, close the petition, because we believe that the level of research into ME has increased, and that also the Scottish Government clearly is committed to ensuring of the healthcare professionals' training and education, and also that the Scottish Government is going further and has advised that people should not be present accepting the unwanted GET or CBT treatments. So I'm happy to close the petition and recommend that happens. Thank you.
Thank you. David Torrance.
Is improving and making progress with all these points, so I'd like to congratulate the petitioner for raising these concerns and for how effective it's been dealt with.
Thank you, David. John Mason.
ME is a very difficult disease or whatever to understand, and even with the most qualified doctors, they struggle. And the work that has been going on in research and attention in medical schools is a good thing. There is a lot of attention now being paid to most of the areas around ME and some of the treatments. So I think this petition has refocused quite a lot of the misunderstandings, and provided that generally with the knowledge we need to go forward. And as long as this level of activity is kept up, then I think ME sufferers will benefit greatly. So, but I think we've done enough in this petition so far. So I think closing the petition, I think, is the right thing to do at this stage.
Thank you. Gail Ross.
Thank you, Convener. I think that we owe a huge vote of thanks to the petitioner, and everyone that suffers from this condition does as well. I don't think that we can underestimate what exactly this has achieved, and the petitioner should be very, very proud of herself. I've had close contact with representatives from the ME for quite a while now, and I'm very alert to their issues. I think that the submission from the Health Secretary that we received last night really does address quite a lot of the points. There is work going on with the Chief Scientist Office. There is the neurological framework that was launched last December, and work with NHS Education Scotland. And through the work of this petition and the submissions that we've had, especially from local health boards, it's also thrown up issues that we've seen regionally as well. And I refer in particular to the NHS Forth Valley submission, and that has also been addressed and corrected. I think that you're right about the COVID situation, and the Health Secretary has also specifically referenced that in her submission, her most recent submission as well. I think that's a really important point. I do think, though, given the remit of this committee, that we have possibly taken this particular petition as far as we can now. I know the petitioner is keen to see it stay open, but I think that what we need to do now is we need to see where all these different pieces of work lead to, and obviously there's the option for the petitioner to come back in a year's time. And I think that a year is probably long enough to see what has changed, because we are looking for big changes, and especially when the NICE guidelines come out in April, I think that should be a big turning point. So again, heartfelt thanks to the petitioner and everyone that has helped her with this. And I hope that we are able to see big changes, but I am minded to agree with the rest of the committee and close this petition today.
Thank you, Gail. Quite struck in the correspondence from the latest correspondence from the Health Secretary that there is a recognition, particularly in this issue about inappropriate treatments. They had a rapid review, but also that she flags up that they continue to work very closely with the petitioner, with third sector organisations supporting people with ME. And I think that would be really important, that it can't be if the petition's closed and that work is lost. And we certainly have had very strong reassurance, I think, from the Health Secretary that that is the case. And I think my sense is that we would agree that we want to close the petition, understanding Order Rules 15.7, that given that the level of research into ME has increased, and it would be important that that was kept under review, that the Scottish Government is committed to ensuring healthcare professionals' training and education materials reflect the latest scientific evidence in light of the forthcoming NICE review. And so one of the concerns about people being treated as if they were not to be believed, I think that there has been progress there, and that they have flagged up that people shouldn't be pressed into accepting unwanted GET and CBT treatments. I think are all important, but I would emphasise again, I think, the importance that we lay on continued dialogue between the Scottish Government and the petitioner, and I know all of the people behind her who supported the petition and people who have had direct experience of this. So I'm taking from the discussion that we are agreeing to close the petition and to thank the petitioner very much for the work that's been done, but recognising there's very important ongoing work to be done. Okay, if that's agreed, we can then move on to the next petition, which is petition 1746 on the creation of a Scottish-based non-departmental public body lodged by Andrew Palawoda. The petition calls on the Scottish Government to create a non-departmental public body with responsibility for space technology and to work in partnership with other relevant organisations to ensure Scotland's space sector potential is fulfilled. The petition was last considered in October 2019 when the committee agreed to write to the Scottish Government and key stakeholders. The Clerk's note summarises the responses that have been received at that meeting. I think it's a really interesting area. It's not something I know a great deal about. I suppose from looking at the submissions and reflecting on this, my own sense is that simply creating a non-departmental public body is not necessarily the way forward. I think it's important to have coordination. It's important to harness people's energy and capacity in this regard and make sure that people are working across different areas. But I think I would take a bit of persuading that we actually need another NDPB to take that forward. But I'll take comments again from members in turn and can ask Maurice Corry for his view.
Thank you, Convener. Yes, I would agree wholeheartedly with the points you've just made. And obviously from the submissions, it's clear that we don't want to create another body on top of what already is going on. And this is very much at the beginning stages of this area of work and business. And I think that whilst the Scottish Government needs to keep a close eye on the progress and support, whether it be through nationally or through local authorities in the areas where, particularly the Highlands and Islands area and the West Scotland, where things seem to be hotting up on, then I would agree that I think we ought to close the petition under the Standing Order Rule 15.7, and on the basis that we don't want to duplicate the existing work that's already going on, and let's home in and maybe have the Scottish Government encourage the harnessing of skills which you rightly referred to and experience on this matter. Thank you.
Thank you, Maurice. David Torrance?
Convener, I would agree with you and Maurice in closing the petition because there's no point in having duplication in work and having nothing else to say in the matter.
Okay, thank you. Tom Mason?
The prospect of development of space activities in Scotland is going well for Scotland at the moment, and the creation of an additional body might actually confuse the issue and put things back and cause some rivalry with the rest of the UK unnecessarily. So I think as things are going well, we're best left in the direction we're going. We have the agencies sufficient to look after Scotland's interests, and I think they just let them get on with it. So closing this petition, I think, is appropriate at this moment. Thank you.
Thank you. Gail Ross?
Thank you, Convener. Well, being the constituency member for the far north of Scotland, and we're getting the UK's first spaceport, which is extremely exciting. I've seen firsthand how the agencies already work together. HIE, Scottish Government, the Council, the UK Space Agency, and private companies as well. And you know, they've already worked together in a collaborative sense, and we've managed to get to this stage. So as the other members of the committee have stated, and as has been stated in our papers, unfortunately I just see the creation of another body as a duplication of work, and I think it would bring more confusion rather than more clarity. And the people that are working in this sector are getting on with it quite well already. So I would agree that we should just close this petition, but to thank the petitioner for his interest.
Thank you very much for that. I was particularly struck by what HIE said, because if the enterprise body, they themselves believe that they did not need another body to do it, then I found that quite a compelling argument. I think it is essential that coordination does go ahead, that we facilitate those who are trying to work together in an area that is obviously very different and very creative and has a lot of potential. We don't want to be sitting in a few years' time saying, well, we didn't achieve the potential because perhaps the underlying concern of the petitioner is that the power of this has not been recognised sufficiently. We would want to recognise how important that work being done is. But I think we are agreeing that we'd want to close this petition, recognise the importance of the issues that have been highlighted, and recognise the importance of coordination, people working together, but that we take the view that the non-departmental public body with responsibility for space technology would actually duplicate work and would perhaps create a pause by the very fact of having to create the body in itself. It's not something that happens overnight. So we want to close the petition, look forward to the excitement and the energy that space industry will bring to Gail's neck of the wood and maybe elsewhere, we never know. But to thank the petitioner again for highlighting this important area of development in terms of Scotland's future, and thank them very much for their interest. If we can now move to the next continued petition, which is petition 1747 on adequate funding to support children with additional support needs in all Scottish schools, lodged by Alison Thompson. The petition calls on the Scottish Government to provide adequate funding to support children with additional support needs in all Scottish schools, primary, secondary and special. This petition was last considered in October 2019 when the committee agreed to write to the Scottish Government, Education Scotland, COSLA and Enable Scotland. The committee received responses from the Scottish Government, Education Scotland and COSLA. It also received a response from the Royal Blind. These submissions are summarised in our briefing papers. This is again an area that I have a great deal of interest in, and my great fear is there's a gap between the theoretical support for children with additional support needs and the reality in their own direct experience. And I think we would want to highlight, and I certainly would want to highlight, that it may be theoretically that funding is increased to local government, although there are increased responsibilities as well. But there is a lot of anecdotal evidence that young people are not being appropriately supported. We wonder, post-COVID-19, what needs to be done to ensure that those young people who perhaps were most disadvantaged by lockdown don't continue to be. I think my own view is that there are budget questions, there are questions of where support is not necessarily just in mainstream, but they're just flagged up by the Royal Blind and so on. So I do think it's an important area. The question is whether it is for the committee to continue that, or whether I know that this is work that the Education Committee has looked at in the past, and I would certainly hope that the Education Committee in the Scottish Parliament continues to be alive to the lived experience of families of young people with additional support needs, and the gap between what they might reasonably expect and what they are actually receiving is important. But I'll ask members for their comments, and I'll call Maurice Corry.
Convener, this is, in my opinion, an extremely important issue, and I agree with the points you said, and I think this is something that we do need to refer to the Education and Skills Committee, because we know that they're working on issues like this. But I'm extremely grateful for the submission by the Royal Blind Institute, which really highlights a very important issue about further and higher education and the employment of people with these needs, and particularly as we have post-COVID and the problems that's going to unfortunately highlight as we move forward. And I certainly would commend this. I also must declare an interest. My wife works in this area in the education sector in the west of Scotland, so I do hear it firsthand how important this is and how we see children and pupils and students improve enormously if they get the right support. And after all, we are looking for people who can create these skills, but also amongst those with additional support needs, we recognise that there's many talented people there, and we need to encourage that. And I would fully endorse that we submit this to the Education Skills Committee for further examination. Thank you.
Thank you, Maurice. And can I call David Torrance, and can I ask him just to pause till his microphone goes on before he speaks? We've not been picking it up, everything you've been saying. Okay, David?
Okay, thank you for that, Convener. I won't come in too early. Convener, I'm very sympathetic to this petition. As somebody in the past who's worked with people with additional needs, I know the concerns raised, and in many cases, sometimes the lack of support is not there. So I am quite happy to pass this over to the Education and Skills Committee, because they've done a lot of work in this area, and I'd like to see their response and if they're going to take it on. So under Standing Rule 15.62, I would definitely like to pass it over to the Education Committee.
Thank you very much, David. Tom Mason?
Thank you, Convener. This issue is too important to be dealt as, if you like, a minority issue. I mean, it should be mainstream, and it should be dealt with the main Education and Sports Committee as a major issue. And if there is a gap identified here, then they should take it up and run with it. I was actually just disappointed we really only had evidence from the Royal Blind School. I mean, there are many other types of needs which need to be addressed, and the most suitable body for this monitoring and cajoling and pushing along is the Education and Sports Committee. So refer to that. I would agree with. Thank you.
Thank you, Gail Ross.
Thank you, Convener. Yes, I agree. It's lots of important issues raised in this petition. As a member of the Education and Skills Committee, the ASN issue is ongoing in our work programme, so we would find it very useful in informing our work. So I would agree to pass that on. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I think all members would agree with the importance of the issue, the flagging up of the funding, presumption of mainstream has to be effectively funded, but also I think as the Royal Blind highlights, if local authorities feel they can't afford to make placements in that kind of way, it may be that some young people are losing out on very specialist support that they require. There's clearly a general consensus that there's a general consensus that the best place for this to be continued in a serious way over a longer period of time is through the Education and Skills Committee. I think what we're proposing is that we would refer this petition under Standing Order Rule 15.6 to the Education and Skills Committee to consider in the context of its work on additional support for learning. And in referring it, I think we want to highlight to them, we recognise this is something that they've already looked at, but that we are concerned or maybe I'm putting words in other people's mouths, but post-COVID, there's even a greater challenge, I think, to ensure that young people with additional support needs are supported through the education system. Does anyone disagree with the proposal that's been put? No. In that case, we would again want to thank the petitioner for highlighting these really important issues, and we would refer it to the Education Skills Committee, where we ensure we will have confident these matters will be considered further. If we can now move to the next continued petition for consideration today, which is petition 1748 on Provide Protection for Small Communities in Scottish Planning Policy, lodged by Isabel Kelly on behalf of Gartcosh Tenant and Residents Association. The petition calls on the Scottish Government to provide specific provision within the National Planning Framework 3 and the Scottish Planning Policy for Small Communities, which provides for a pre-development community asset and infrastructure audit when an area is identified as being able to accommodate large-scale urban growth, and protects areas considered by its community to be high value, scenic assets and at risk of the coalition of communities. And I understand that Fulton McGregor MSP is in attendance for consideration of this petition, and we'd want to welcome him to the petition committee today. The committee last considered this petition in October 2019, when the committee agreed to write to the Scottish Government and key stakeholders. The clerk's note summarises the responses that have been received. The submissions explain that the Scottish Government is developing National Planning Framework 4, initially aiming to publish its draft framework in September 2020. Timescales have been affected by COVID-19. The draft framework is now expected in September 2021, with a finalised framework to be adopted in September 2022. The Scottish Government will be consulting widely on the draft framework. Ahead of that work, the Scottish Government is currently consulting on interim changes to Scottish planning policy, which aim to clarify specific parts of the Scottish planning policy that relate to planning for housing. These changes, once finalised, will apply over the interim period ahead of the adoption of the new framework. And I would like to call on Fulton McGregor to comment on the issues flagged up in this petition.
Well, good morning and thank you, Convener, and thank you to all committee members for allowing me to again speak to you about this petition raised by my constituent Isabel Kelly, the Gartcosh Tenants and Residents Association. And again, can I take the opportunity to thank Isabel and everyone on the association for all their work on this issue. I do promise to be brief, Convener. As you know, when the petition was before the committee in September last year, we discussed and agreed the need for housing development. However, also that robust legislation must be in place to also protect the natural environment, places of local interest, and the right of those living in smaller communities to have valued input in planning applications and decisions about their lives and their communities. And I want to thank the committee for getting the various responses that you have. It's very extensive indeed. Took me a while to read through them. And having read through the responses, I am satisfied that the issues raised in the petition will be fairly and robustly addressed by new legislation. And I think that Isabel and the association can be very proud about the role they've had in that. And also from a local planning perspective, in North Lanarkshire, the lessons have been learned through the Gartcosh Glenboig example, with the local authority acknowledging community growth area. A model is one unlikely to be repeated. Our population is ever growing and development is very much needed, but as I said before, it absolutely requires to be sympathetic to the already existing communities and of course those who will become part of those communities in the future. As I say, I do feel satisfied that new legislation and guidance is robust enough to address the issues raised in this petition, and noting your possible courses of action, Convener, I would recommend that these issues are raised with the Local Government and Communities Committee for further consideration in any scrutiny it undertakes in the draft NPF4. I feel this would be a good outcome for the petitioner, and although the issues affect the whole country, keep the situation at Gartcosh and Glenboig highlighted at a national level. But I can also reassure the Association Gartcosh, as well as the Safe Steps Greenbelt Group, who I mentioned the last time also, who are in the north of my constituency, that as restrictions are being eased in relation to the pandemic, I am personally again looking at how we can set up a cross-party group roundtable event, have a discussion on these very issues, which both the Gartcosh Tenants and Residents Association have raised through this petition, but also the Save Steps Greenbelt group in interactions with me. I hope this is helpful to the committee. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Fulton, for that. I'll forgive you for your advert for your local constituency work. Obviously, in terms of the Public Petitions Committee, our role is to look at the general national issues that flag up from individual experience, and I think we would recognise that the petitioner has been given the opportunity to flag up the individual question. What we need to look at is whether at national level we're able to make sure that those concerns and general experiences are being addressed, and I welcome the fact that you take the view that new legislation guidance will be intended to address that direct experience. And also, I reflect, I think that these are issues that we'd want the Local Government and Communities Committee to be aware of as they're taking the work forward, particularly around any scrutiny on draft NPF 4. Can I ask members their comments, and I'll call Maurice Corry first.
For his input, which is very interesting. I certainly am seeing more of these actions by local communities as planning applications come in, and sizable planning applications come in the West Scotland region. And I welcome the petitioners' submission here and all the comments that they've made. I too would advise that we write as a committee to the Local Government Committee and Communities Committee for further consideration in relation to the preparation of the NPF 4. But I also welcome Fulton's idea of the round table cross-party, which is suggested in his submission just now. And I think it's an excellent idea, and I certainly would support that, Fulton and Convener, that going forward is another issue. But it is something it's going to raise. It's also going to raise itself more so as a result of the COVID emergency and the resultant developments that might happen in community development. So I welcome the comments, and I would implore that we write, as I say, submit this further up the line to the Local Government Communities Committee.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Maurice. David Torrance.
Thank you, Convener. Convener, it's an issue all local communities. I think everybody who's an MSP has met with these issues, especially some of the small communities that we represent, and the plan applications that's come through them. But I would actually like to close the petition under Standing Orders Rule 15.7 on the basis that new legislation and guidance is likely to tackle many of the issues highlighted and raised in the petition. And like Maurice, I think we should write to the Local Government and Communities Committee for any scrutiny on the new NPF 4 to make sure they highlight and look at all issues raised in this petition.
Yeah, thank you very much, David. Tom Mason.
Thank you, Convener. Just to remind the committee, I'm a local councillor in Aberdeen and get involved in planning one way or another. In fact, as an MSP as well. My knowledge of planning goes back many years, and one of the things I've found over the years is the lack of involvement of the population at early stages of the planning process, and to make these frameworks well discussed and robust and at an early stage, rather than having to rebel against the planning decisions when applications come in. So anything that enhances the process of consultation at an early stage is to me advantageous. But certainly any points raised by this petition should be notified through and discussed by the local government. So right local government to highlight these issues is important, and it's important to make sure all various issues are kept in high profile on a continuous basis when the planning process is taking place. So a very useful petition to raise these issues, and with a notification to local government, I think is important at this stage. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tom. Gail Ross.
Thank you, Convener. Yes, I have very little to add. I just want to thank the petitioners and also to Fulton McGregor. I think if the local MSP is satisfied, then that's good enough. And the petitioners have done a lot of good work here. Content to write to Local Government and Communities Committee to highlight the issues and to make sure that they are included in the consideration for the National Planning Framework 4, which we are working towards, but also content to close the petition. Thank you.
Thank you, Gail. I think that we do want to thank Fulton for his contribution, recognise the role of the petitioners, recognise the broader context of planning, the impact on people's lives. It feels like a million years ago when I was the planning minister, it took legislation through, and the big issue then was how you balanced the interests of development against the rights of local communities. So there's still clearly all these years later lots and lots to learn. I think we as a committee are agreeing to close the petition on the basis that the new legislation guidance is likely to tackle many of the issues highlighted, raised in the petition, and we would encourage the petitioner to engage in the Scottish Government's current consultation, as well as the consultation in NPF 4 when it's published. But that we would want to write to the Local Government Communities Committee just simply to flag up and highlight the issues raised by this petition in the hope that it would be helpful to them in any scrutiny they're going to undertake. And with that, I think we're agreed on that, and we'd want to thank the petitioner for all they've done to highlight these issues. If we can now move on, the final continued petition for consideration today, which is petition 1751 on Create No Wild Camp Zones in Scotland, lodged by Christine Curry. The petition calls on the Scottish Government to create legislation to enable local authorities to create no wild camp zones in Scotland. I think given the current circumstances we're in, this has proven to be a petition that was generated even more interest than perhaps might have expected in the past. And I'm sure I'm not the only person disturbed that one of the consequences of people not travelling abroad for their holidays and travelling to other parts of Scotland, which is a wonderful thing, that there is actually just a general disregard and respect for local communities. I've certainly seen now local parks where people seem incapable of taking their litter away with them, and I think it's become an issue simply because of the circumstances of lockdown, but from certainly submissions there's a longer term thing. And I think my own sense is that where there's been a reaction to this is amongst those very people who have been the most concerned about landscape, who have been most concerned about the countryside, who have been most respectful of it. I felt that this perhaps petition was seeking to close down that kind of wild camping, as opposed to what I think has now been described as dirty camping. So I think that there are important issues to be raised here. And I'm going to ask members for any comments, but I'm going to call Gail Ross first this time.
Thank you, Convener. We've heard this petition previously, and as I stated previously on the record, it's been brought forward by a member of my team at the Scottish Parliament. So I'm therefore going to excuse myself from comment on the actual petition itself and its merits or otherwise. But however, as the constituency MSP for one of the most spectacular parts of Scotland, and one of the places where a lot of people want to visit during this summer, and who can blame them, I feel I must input in a general sense, because things have moved on somewhat since we got the petitions back in November. Since the 15th of July, when the tourism restrictions were lifted, as you said yourself, Convener, a lot of people have been taking advantage of what we call staycations and holidaying in Scotland. Unfortunately, I've been inundated with reports of what we are now calling dirty camping, you're correct. People leaving litter, waste, excrement, etc. in various locations. And this just isn't happening in my area, as you say. I note from topical questions on the 10th of August, it's happening in a lot more areas all over Scotland. I feel that this is too important an issue now for us just to take at face value and to close. I think there's a lot more work to be done on this. So I recommend passing this on to the Rural Economy and Connectivity Committee for further consideration and possibly evidence from the Cabinet Secretary, which I think is important. And one more thing just before I finish, Convener. Members of the public should feel comfortable taking forward petitions to our committee in a safe and open manner. And although we encourage disagreement and debate absolutely welcome, I just want to put on record that harassment and intimidation from members of the public to petitioners is never acceptable, and nor should it be tolerated. Thank you.
Thanks very much for that, Gail. And on the last point, I think we'd want to underline that, and I would just feel very concerned that any petitioner felt inhibited from bringing forward a petition or for wishing that they hadn't brought one forward because of the reaction. I mean, it's one thing, absolutely, to be firm and robust in our views if we disagree with a petition, and that's why we call for submissions and people responses, but it has to be done in a way, as Gail quite rightly says, it doesn't people feel harassed and intimidated. Is unacceptable. I think perhaps we need to relearn the difference between robust debate and simply being hostile to people when they disagree with us. I'll call Maurice Corry.
I agree with Gail on the referral upwards to the Rural Economy and Connectivity Committee, because it's a very big issue. And I too live in another beautiful part of Scotland. I have Loch Lomond National Park in my area, and we have a lot of problems now with this wild camping, and particularly dirty camping, as a result of the new issues that are happening from people just simply do not understand how to look after the countryside. So I would absolutely support that, and I think that it's important that we write also to the Scottish Government in relation to how we take this forward, because it's coming up more and more now. If we're going to encourage people to have healthy living and go outdoors and staycations, then we need to do something about it. And I reinforce the Rural Economy and Connectivity Committee referral, Convener.
Yeah, David Torrance.
Thank you, Convener. This is a very topical issue. This subject's been raised with me. So I come from Fife, Kingdom of Fife. It's got some beautiful beaches, and the mess has been left by people visiting it. But as somebody who loves the Cairngorms, especially National Park, I was on holiday there 4 weeks ago, and the damage that was done at Loch Morley from what is now classed as dirty campers was incredible. So I'm very, very supportive of the petition. Can I just put on record, though, a lot of people who go wild camping are responsible, and they take all the rubbish and that home with them. But it's the ones out there who don't, and they have no respect for the countryside and the communities that they're in. That raises real concerns for me. Like yourself and Maurice, I think we should pass it on to the Rural Economy Committee. But I would definitely like to write to the Scottish Government to see if they will, from many of the submissions, create a working group on this issue and see if we can take that forward. Convener, thank you.
Okay, Tom.
Thank you, Convener. I mean, the great wild landscape of Scotland was the reason I chose Scotland as my home 40 odd years ago, and enjoyed it ever since. And it does distress me that some minorities are destroying the benefits that we have in Scotland of the great highlands and landscapes we possess. I'm very much aware that any actions taken could have unintended consequences. And one of the immediate situations might occur if we ban certain areas, you just simply get displacement to other areas, and that needs to be thought about very carefully. I mean, I guess in the end, it's going to be a question of deep education over time to get people online again. I mean, there used to be a time where, the thought of ever putting litter out in any form was frowned upon. Now it seems to be common practice. So we've over the years have let our education of the populations slip in good behaviour in the countryside generally. But if the way to resolve this is to form some form of committee to look at the issues, then that's what we must do, and getting the Scottish Government to apply their mind to the best way of handling this. And I guess the Royal Committee is one area which we need to fully involved to get the right evidence, so we go forward in a process that really works and doesn't cause too many unintended consequences, which we then have to deal with later. So certainly agree with what's been said, and it should go forward on that basis. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tom, for that. I think there is agreement that we would want to close the petition on the basis that the actions proposed are not widely supported by stakeholders. I think there was some submissions that flagged up the whole question of facilities for people visiting, and people should be alive that if you're going to have an increase in tourism and visitors, then there should be facilities for them too. That some of it is about behaviour, but that we recognise some reaction from some of the stakeholders who are the most thoughtful and the most considerate in the way in which they camp, and we would want to make that distinction. My sense is that the committee is agreeing to refer the committee to the Rural Economy and Connectivity Committee, and might I suggest that we simply flag up to them this issue of the working group and ask that they explore this matter with the Scottish Government, because we would not then be able to get the response back if the Scottish Government, we would no longer be dealing with it. So if members are agreed, we will refer it across, Maurice, to the Rural Affairs Committee, not up to it, since we're all, the Public Petitions Committee is every bit as important as every other committee. So, but if that is agreed, we can thank the petitioner and emphasise again, I think, the importance of public petitions being a space where we can have honest agreement and robust discussion. With that, can I thank members for this first virtual meeting, thank the clerks for all their support and the broadcasting team. I look forward to having everybody back in the committee room at some point, but I think we managed very effectively to get through a lot of important business today from the virtual sphere. So with that, can I thank everyone for their attendance and close the meeting?